I've been reading through the Mormon CES letter lately, and I decided to write down a few pointed questions I have for Jehovah's Witnesses. If they can answer these questions to my satisfaction, then I would become a Jehovah's Witness again. So let's see if we can get them out, and if a Jehovah's Witness can give convincing answers to these questions, and convince me that they have the truth, then I solemnly swear that I will turn this channel into a pro-Jehovah's Witness hub. Let's get into it. Question 1. Do you believe that death didn't exist until Adam and Eve sinned? And if so, what happened to the dinosaurs? Jehovah's Witnesses are a unique case in the sense that they're old Earth creationists, not young Earth creationists. So people like Ken Ham and Kent Hovind believe that dinosaurs existed alongside humans in the past 10,000 years. Now there are really simple ways to debunk that kind of thing. For example, we have trees around that are older than 10,000 years. The young Earth creationist position is that the Earth is 6,000 years old. So how do we have 10,000-year-old trees if the Earth wasn't created until 6,000 years ago, and the flood supposedly happened 4,000 years ago? But that's really beside the point, because Jehovah's Witnesses have no problem with that premise. They accept that the Earth is 4.54 billion years old. They accept that the universe was created 13 trillion years ago. They just can't accept that humanity started any other way than Adam and Eve being created in the Garden of Eden. So here's my question. How did dinosaurs eat, live, and die before Adam and Eve existed, if death didn't enter into the world until the first sin was committed? Question 2. Why did God allow humans who had sinned, namely Adam and Eve, to procreate instead of quarantining them and creating a new perfect breeding pair? Isn't God to blame for the deaths of every human from the beginning of time? He could have even made them sterile. Let them like bunnies to their heart's content. Just prevent them from procreating. Or, if that doesn't sit right with you, just take the desire for procreation away from it. Let them live out the rest of their lives in that pretty little garden, make the snake crawl around on its belly as punishment, and start from scratch with a new set. Once you start poking holes in this stuff, it just falls to pieces. Next question. Number 3. Why are Jehovah's Witnesses still so opposed to beards when we know that the reason for their original beard ban was because the early president, Joseph Rutherford, wanted to distance people from the founder, who had a big bushy beard? There was this book called 30 Years a Watchtower Slave, written in 1957, and it tells an experience of some of the leadership from 1925, which is about 9 years after the founder, Charles Taze Russell, died. At this point, Rutherford had taken control of the religion, but the hostile takeover and renaming hadn't happened yet. That happened in 1931. So let's give this bit a read from the book. Like I said, it's called 30 Years a Watchtower Slave, on page 51 and 52. It says, an amusing incident took place at the time of the judge's visit, the judge being Joseph Rutherford. The director of our German branch, as had many before him, had grown a large beard, patterned after Charles T. Russell's beard. The judge did not want anything at all to remain which might remind him of Russell, not even the cultivation of a beard. So, sitting at the table for dinner one night within my earshot, the director asked the judge for one more large rotary press. The judge said nothing for a while, merely ate. So suddenly he looked up, his eyes pinned severely on the director's huge beard, and said, I will buy you the press if you take that thing off, pointing to the beard. It surely shocked the director's sensibilities, but he meekly heeded the warning and soon shamefacedly appeared minus the beard. The story was confirmed in the 1974 Watchtower yearbook, but the reason they cited in the yearbook was because Rutherford felt like it was creature worship, quote unquote. So if you were wondering, that's why Jehovah's Witnesses don't wear beards. Okay, next one. Number 4. How can you justify the early president of the Watchtower Society having a large mansion constructed with members' money during the Great Depression in the US and deeded to Bible characters? How can you justify him choosing to live in it until those Bible characters returned? This question is kind of important to me, because it's the thing that got me to wake up from the religion. When I was in it, Jehovah's Witnesses taught how wrong every other religion is in the world. They talked non-stop about how corrupt Christianity is, and how they're the only correct ones. So when somebody asked me this question, it made me realize that Jehovah's Witnesses were just as corrupt as any of them, and I defaulted to not believing in any religion. That simple. Bonus fact, Joseph Rutherford, the early president, also owned a nice big Cadillac. Remember, this is in the 30s, during the Great Depression, and when cars were pretty new to the world. Okay, moving on. Number 5. According to Deuteronomy 18:22, we shouldn't fear people who prophesy falsely. After 30 failed predictions, and one current prediction out that's bound to fail in the next 15 years or so, when should we stop listening to you? This question is pretty self-explanatory. Deuteronomy 18:22 says, "If what a prophet proclaims in the name of the Lord does not take place or come true, that is a message the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken presumptuously, so do not be alarmed." Jehovah's Witnesses have made so many failed predictions that I absolutely cannot take them seriously anymore. If you're wondering what the context of the predictions were, you can watch the video Failed Armageddon Predictions that I just put out. You can click the card in the corner to check it out. Anyways, some of the predictions were far more significant and damaging than others. Some were casual dates thrown out, some were time frames, and some were exact. And when they failed, people left in droves. Which brings me nicely to my next question. Number 6. How can you show your faces publicly again after popularizing phrases such as "stay alive to 75," telling people that's when Armageddon was going to take place? This wasn't a casual claim. They stopped saying the end is near in their literature and talks, as they always have and as they do now, and they started saying the end is here. As I covered in my predictions video, the reason why they believed Armageddon was going to come in 1975 is because they think that God works in sevens, numerology, and they calculated it out to conclude that 1975 was going to be 6,000 years after God created Adam and Eve. And of course, since God started resting after the 6th day, they figured his wrath would rain down on humanity after 6,000 years. Number 7. Do you agree with the 1947 Watchtower that excommunication by the Catholic Church is a pagan practice, or at the very least wrong? And if so, why do you practice it in the form of disfellowshipping? I covered this in a recent video too. I have a copy of the Watchtower from 1947, which is now considered apostate material. If you have a copy of this, the elders will have some hard questions for you. The Watchtower is about excommunication in the Catholic Church. And to summarize, it basically says that excommunication started as a pagan practice. It talks about how the Bible doesn't endorse excommunication, and in a fairly recent piece of their literature, they even say that it's wrong to force somebody to choose between religion and family. Oh, the irony. The hypocrisy behind this one is stunning. Let me just read a couple of quotes from Jehovah's Witnesses literature to draw a picture of how they view the situation when it suits them. This is from April 15th, 1988 Watchtower. "It might be possible to have almost no contact at all with the relative. Even when there are some family members requiring contact, this certainly would be kept to a minimum, in line with the divine principle, quit mixing in company with anyone called a brother that is a fornicator or a greedy person." Now that's not the end of the quote, but I just noticed that they put this next bit in brackets, which means they're trying to add something in that isn't actually there. In brackets it said, "or guilty of another gross sin." Interesting. Then it goes on to say, "not even eating with such a man." That quote's from 1 Corinthians 5:11. Wait, is it 1 Corinthians or is it 1 Corinthians? I feel like this is 1 Corinthians. I mean, I grew up in the religion and I heard these quotes all my life, so obviously I grew up saying 1 Corinthians, but I kind of like the Trump way better, so I'll say 1 Corinthians. Anyways, that quote is taken out of context. This is a letter from Paul to the Corinthian congregation. There was somebody who had broken the rules, and Paul was explaining to them what should be done with him. After they did exactly what he said, he realized what he'd instructed was wrong, and he sent a follow-up letter in his second letter to the Corinthians, where he said the punishment inflicted on him by the majority is sufficient. Now instead, you ought to forgive and comfort him, so that he will not be overwhelmed with excessive sorrow. I urge you, therefore, to reaffirm your love for him. That's 2 Corinthians 2:6-8. Sounds like a backpedal if I have ever heard one. But Jehovah's Witnesses conveniently ignore that context, because it doesn't fit in with how they want things to operate. Anyways, the quote from the Watchtower goes on to say, "Understandably, this may be difficult because of emotions and family ties, such as grandparents' love for their grandchildren. Yet, this is a test of loyalty to God, as stated by the sister quoted on page 26. Actually, it's a test of loyalty to the Watchtower Society. The Bible legitimately does not endorse this kind of thing. Okay, moving on to the next question. Number 8. Do you think that pagan practices are wrong? If so, why do you wear wedding rings, which is firmly rooted in pagan tradition? Jehovah's Witnesses are always talking about how bad pagan practices are. They completely separate themselves from massive cultural events in the name of staying clean from pagan practices. It's completely over the top. But the strangest part about it is the fact that it's hit or miss. Some quote-unquote pagan practices are acceptable, others aren't. The practices they condemn versus the ones they don't condemn are largely based on the history of the religion. It's honestly really difficult to separate yourself completely from pagan practices, because paganism as a culture has contributed so much to worldwide societies. Toasting is a pagan practice which Jehovah's Witnesses condemn. They claim that birthdays are pagan practices. Easter has heavy pagan influence. Christmas has some pagan influence, but honestly not anywhere near as much as Jehovah's Witnesses tend to let on. Most of this stuff is condemned by Jehovah's Witnesses, but in January 15th, 1969 Watchtower, page 58, it says, "Since there are so many traditional practices, should a Christian try to avoid all the wedding customs of his area? Not necessarily. In many lands, it's common to throw rice at the bride and groom. What's the point of this custom? Some people believe that rice is food to keep evil influences away from the bride and groom. Some say it assures the couple's fertility. And of course, as I mentioned in the question, exchanging wedding rings is a pagan practice. So why do Jehovah's Witnesses refuse to take part in Christmas and birthdays and toasting, but they have no issue with throwing rice or exchanging wedding rings? It's completely inconsistent. Number 9. How can you justify desperately begging your members for money when the founder clearly said that God would supply the organization with enough money as long as it still had God's blessing? I covered this in a recent video too. Charles Taze Russell famously said that he asked somebody for a donation once, and he felt wrong about it. He said to himself, "But you aren't asking for money for you, you're asking for the Lord. But if you'd be ashamed to ask for yourself, shouldn't you be even more ashamed to ask for the Lord?" That's when he decided that the moment God decided to stop supplying money to the organization is the moment it loses his blessing. If the money stops coming in, then the work will decrease in proportion. But here they are, asking for money on their JW Broadcasting TV show. I'm sorry, not asking, begging, reading Bible scriptures about how you should give your first fruits to God and everything. It was the most embarrassing thing to watch, especially considering, as the John Cedars channel points out, that some of the governing body members who make regular appearances on the TV show wear Rolex watches and pinky rings, and other affectations. It's terrible. Okay, I didn't cover lots of really important subjects in this video, like blood transfusions, their mishandling of sexual abuse, or the fact that it appears as though they're taking the BITE model, the model we use to determine if something's a cult or not, and modeling their religion after it, figuring out the best way to keep people under control. That stuff is probably on its way in a future video, but that's all I've got for you for now. Don't forget to support me on Patreon if you like what I do and you want to see me continue to do it. I released a video recently in support of the GRSM community, and it got demonetized for the first full day, which is when it'll see most of the views that it'll ever see. That got to me, because YouTube purports to support the GRSM community, but they demonetize pro-GRSM videos during Pride Month. Now, to your credit, you all supported me through it. I saw a massive swell of support on Patreon and Teespring, which evened out the damage done by releasing a demonetized video. I'm a lot more comfortable with releasing videos now that'll probably be demonetized, because I can trust that I'll have the money I need to pay rent every month, whether I get ad revenue or not. And to YouTube's credit, they did monetize the video after the first day, but they kept it off the recommendation list. So it'll be recommended to people significantly less often as a result. That means, for the most part, the only way you'll ever get to see that video is if you go to my YouTube channel, you check your subscriptions tab, or you search for it in the search bar. It's a lot less likely to appear as a suggested video in Up Next or in the sidebar. Either way, at least they remonetized. Anyways, if you want to follow my work, you can also check me out on Facebook, where I usually release videos a little bit early. So if you want to see early releases, then check them out there. And finally, if you want to check out my podcast, I talk about all kinds of interesting stuff. Not only do I talk about politics and news, I also talked about the recent Jehovah's Witness situation with Reddit, where Jehovah's Witnesses tried to get an apostate's real name from Reddit. It's a big court battle and it got really ugly. All links are in the description as always. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.